So who are SEED? So we are the Social Economic Equality and Diversity Network, and it's part of the British Ecological Society. And it was set up to support ecologists that come from underrepresented backgrounds. And as a network, we aim to highlight the social economic barriers and kind of build a supportive community. So this is mainly for those that are first generation, so first in families to go to university, or come from a working class background. We're currently focusing on barriers within the UK, but we acknowledge that these barriers are complex, diverse, and interacting. But our vision as a network is to ensure that everyone has equal opportunities to contribute to ecology. I'm Dr. Kira Dwyer. I'm the co-chair for the SEED Network. I am first generation and I am from a working class background. And currently I'm a postdoc in Sweden working on pollinators. So we're here today to talk about, to hear from 4 amazing ecologists, which I'm very excited. But before I pass on to Chris, who is going to be our chair for this evening, I just wanted to kind of run 2 things by everyone. So firstly, we just want to make this it's kind of a safe space for all attendees. So we want to make sure it's inclusive and welcoming, so that anyone, whether you are a speaker or whether you are just attending for this evening. As audience members, you're going to have the opportunity to participate and ask questions. So if there are any questions that may be a bit too personal, we might avoid asking it. Secondly, our co-chair, Josh Jones, who is a NUC PhD student at Oxford, will be posting some links in our chat as well. So this will be social media and kind of links about SEED Network. So now over to Chris, Dr. Chris Jeffs, who will be our chair for this evening. Chris began his career as an academic, but then decided to change his career path to focus more on public engagement, science communication, and career development. And currently he works at the University of Oxford as a career advisor. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much. So first of all, just to say, it's really nice to be invited to be part of this event. So thank you so much. And as Kira said, my background is in ecology. So I started off with my biology degree, moving through entomology because insects are my favorite, and I did climate change ecology. But after a PhD and a postdoc doing research, I sort of decided there was a need for a bit of a change, and my path lie elsewhere. So I actually worked for the British Ecological Society for 5 years. So it's great to see some familiar names and faces as part of this event. But why this one is so great, why I'm so happy to be part of this event, is I also come from that first generation, and I don't mind saying low-income background. And events like this are just absolutely fantastic for helping us build that support network for ourselves, to see about those kind of support networks that we can build for each other, and that advice that perhaps sometimes is absent from certain backgrounds that we may be part of. So just thank you for putting on this event, because it's absolutely fantastic. But enough about me, because you're not here to listen to me speak. So a bit of housekeeping first, just a reminder that if everybody could keep their video turned off and keep yourself muted, apart from the speakers, of course, so we minimize a bit of the disruption for it. And today's going to be structured into sort of 4 sections. And first, we're going to have a bit of an introduction by each of our 4 speakers. And we've got a really nice range of speakers across different areas of ecology, which will be absolutely fantastic to hear about. And we're just going to hear a little bit of a question on their presentations as well, introducing them to themselves. But after this, we're going to have a much more open format where it will be all about your questions. So in the chat box of Zoom, please do absolutely pepper it with the questions that you would like to ask. And just remember, if you wouldn't want those questions to be attributed to you openly, then don't worry, because you can change the to function on the chat to be directly to Josh or to Kira, and they can pass those questions on to me. So please do feel free to ask those questions either openly in the chat or directly in the private function to Kira or Josh. So once we start that open format, we're going to be focusing first a little bit on each of our speakers' career sectors. So finding out a bit about what they involve, what are they, how might you experience a day in the life of in this sector. The second bit will be focusing typically on what qualifications or requirements or pathways might be involved in getting into those sectors. And finally, that fourth section overall, the last section will be focusing specifically on those barriers and perhaps those cultural factors in those sectors. So things that we might face, particularly from backgrounds of first generation or low income backgrounds. So this will be really interactive. Please do use the chat box. If you've got a question, it's most likely that many other people are thinking it too. So please do put it in there. But now let's start going into those introductions. And just to say, because I've been told very strictly that we've got a time schedule to stick to, I will have a little 3-minute timer for each of our speakers to stick to. So this will be your test. If you pass this, you'll be allowed to speak again. So first, could I have Emily Blackwell, please, to unmute and tell us a bit about their journey? So Emily's at the Soil Association as a forestry training manager. So please tell us a bit more about yourself.
Great, thank you, Chris. Hopefully you can see my screen. Brilliant, good. It's just the one slide, but so, okay, I better make sure I'm sticking to the time. So yeah, again, really pleased to be invited to be here. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself, my background and what has inspired me to take this career path. So I grew up in a small village in Somerset, horse riding every week, spending lots of time playing outdoors. My dad was a gardener, my mum was a carer, but had studied forestry, and they really passed on their love for nature to me. I was inspired at school to do a work placement with the local council at the countryside management department, and I really set my heart at that point on working with something environmental and settled on environmental science degree, specialising in ecology biology. And following university, I managed to join a research project in Vietnam doing a biodiversity survey, which really was fantastic and really inspired me further. And then when I came back to the UK, I started working firstly in a butterfly farm for a short while, and then finally got my job with Soil Association in 2002, and I've actually been here ever since. And I've had a lot of amazing opportunities to travel. I've been doing forest audits in a number of different countries, mainly Asia Pacific, and was based in Australia for about nearly 5 years, doing lots of audits in the region, which was really fascinating. And my current role is as Forestry Training Development Manager. So I'm responsible for training up our auditors, making sure they maintain their qualifications, maintaining our programme to make sure it meets all the requirements of our accreditation body, and the requirements of the Forest Stewardship Council. So I think that's a reasonable summary for now. So the photos here are just showing, the ones at the top are showing me out in Southeast Asia on that project, and following it, doing a bit of traveling around the area. And then underneath, delivering some training with WWF earlier in the year, and also being involved in a forest audit at the end of last year, out in Vietnam. I think I'm nearly at the 3 minutes, so I will hand back. Thank you.
Perfect. And I didn't have to sound my alarm out of mute. So perfect. Thanks, Emily. One question we've got for you after that. So it looks like you've got the chance to go to some amazing places. But after university, when you mentioned that biodiversity survey you were doing in Vietnam, how did you raise the money to join that project? Because that can be a bit of a barrier for many of us from certain backgrounds.
Definitely, yeah. So I did need to raise nearly £3,000 to join that project as a research assistant. And so I wrote to lots of grant funds and trusts and got some support that way. I ran an event in the student union, got some friends' bands to play for free and charged tickets. I did a fancy dress sponsored walk, a jumble sale, and also had my picture in the local newspaper, and people sort of sent me checks to support what I was doing, which was really appreciated. So yeah, but it was really a sort of turning point of, you know, getting that experience that I needed to sort of move to the next stage of my career.
And there is a reality, isn't it, that sometimes it does take that extra hard graft to fund some of these development opportunities. And I'm sure that might be a question that many in the audience might have when we're later on in the events to talk about some of those barriers as well. So thank you for sharing. That's perfect. And now I'm going to move on to our second speaker. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Sridhar Halali, who is actually a senior lecturer in plant science. It is a postdoc at the University of Lund in Sweden. So yeah, we're getting from exotic climes from Sweden joining us today. So Sridhar, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Chris. And hello, everyone. And first of all, thanks, Kira and Josh, making me part of this exciting session. I'm Sridhar, and I'm an evolutionary ecologist. So broadly put, if someone is interested, like I try to understand, like, why do animals do what they do and how they do it, right? And it sort of encompasses this broad range of questions you can ask in evolutionary biology. I come from this beautiful place in Southwest India. It's called Goa. Some of you may have heard of it. And I did not have like any eureka moment as such, like, you know, when I wanted to do research in evolutionary biology or say biology in general. It was rather a very slow process for me. And I believe my early interest in wildlife was kind of shaped by this, some of the nature camps I was attending as part of my school curriculum. Didn't have to pay anything for it, and there I met like some really great mentors who really ended up having like a big impact on my career, and they are still quite inspiring to me, and I really ask for their advice too when I want to do some things in my career. So after finishing my school, I actually joined civil engineering, which I did for 3 months. I left it off and came back to do bachelor's in zoology. And I like to say I was following my passion for wildlife. I don't know. I then joined Masters in Zoology in my hometown. I left it off again. And then I started with another master's program in wildlife biology, and I did finish it this time. And then after I ended up working as a research assistant in the really great labs in India again. And I believe that was like a tipping point in my career. I really met amazing mentors there. And they helped me out quite a lot with my application to do a PhD abroad. I applied for multiple places, got until interview for some of the places, but I ended up getting for a PhD at the University of Cambridge. And I was fully funded to do PhD for 3 years. After my PhD, I did a really short postdoc, I think around 9 months at the University of Helsinki. And then I moved back south in Sweden at Lund University, where I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher. And if anyone is wondering, I'm trying to understand like why butterflies have different eye sizes, right? Trying to look at the very broad global patterns. And apart from doing research, I'm really passionate about teaching, especially at the grassroots level. Unfortunately, I'm not getting to do it much at my current position, but I really hope to do it in the future. Yeah, thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So it sounds like it was quite a wiggly route into where you are currently. And so a very quick question from me. How did you end up doing ecology specifically? What was the inspiration behind going down that route?
Yeah, but that's what so like I think during my schools, I think I was attending these nature camps, right? And then there are a lot of people. We used to just go out, like see butterflies and birds and dragonflies and whatnot. Just see them. There was nothing like research as such behind it. And I think it's sort of just tinkered curiosity, kind of say, what is this species and what is it doing there? So until my higher secondary school level kind of a thing, and it was kind of more or less, kind of just not any hardcore research, but just like interesting. I want to see what is there, what is not there. And I think the moment I went to engineering and came back to zoology, and then I think it started taking a bit of a shape. I was still not quite there because the curriculum in India is not very research focused as such, at least at the undergrad level, most of the institutes, I would say. And I think the actual research kind of started during my master's. I was just talking to some people, and then there was like, why do you think this is happening? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just wondering, like, why is this happening, right? And that's why in my bio I was saying is like, just started asking why questions, and then it kind of led the way to actually, how do you test hypotheses, how do you do experiments, and trying to figure out stuff. So yeah.
That's perfect. I always love hearing about people who come into ecology from those different routes, because it is a very interdisciplinary field. We do need knowledge of all these different backgrounds, and you actually bring benefits and strengths from coming from those different backgrounds as well, like engineering or whatever it may be. So I always love hearing about that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So next, I'm going to introduce our third speaker. So we've got Zara Patterson, who is a senior lecturer in plant science at the University of Stirling. So Zara, please, in the 3 minutes, could you tell me a bit about yourself?
Hi, so I'm based at the University of Stirling in Scotland. I work on biological invasions, so I'm very interested in how invasive plant species move and impact their non-native environments. And yeah, I am not a traditional science background. I'm originally from South Africa. My mother remarried and we moved to the UK when I was 15. I absolutely hated school. I hated it when I was in South Africa and I hated it when I was in the UK. So I left school at 16 with very few qualifications. I was kind of brought up to work. So your whole thing is you get old enough, you start work. So I started working at about 13 because it was legal in the 90s to do that. And all I wanted to do was go out and work. So I didn't ever have university as an option. It was never something that was discussed with me. And it probably wouldn't have been an option if I'd stayed in South Africa during that time. So yeah, I left school and I went to work as a makeup artist in a retail shop, and then worked my way up from there. Started working across the UK doing makeup. This is before YouTube, by the way, before MUA set status on YouTube. This was self-taught and going out and trying to make money. So and then eventually I had an experience when I was working in one of those stuck-up shops in Knightsbridge and decided I needed to do something different. So I got my qualifications through Open University, and then gave up my job to go to university. And for example, as someone who had no idea how university worked, I'd walk around the department going, how do you get a doctor in front of your name? So having that myself is a real achievement. So yeah, great experiences now being in academia. People like to shout academia has got problems, but I've been offered opportunities that I would have never had in my life through academia. So I'm happy to chat about that and my route from makeup artistry to being dirty in rivers with plants. Thank you. I can go on for more, and I don't know how long. It's 3 minutes.
Perfect. You are bang on. I love it. It's efficient. It's like you timed it. But again, it's that varied route in. It does show that it can be a very accessible subject to get into from different routes. But you also mentioned some of those barriers that we can face. How do I get that doctor in front of my name if you haven't got the people there to actually help you, guide you for that? So a quick question for me, and I know we're going to go on to some of these barriers later on in the session, but how did you feel after entering ecology, from such a different career path? Were there particular challenges you felt from that really different path?
Yeah, I mean, I also left home very young as well. So I had to balance giving up my job. I only went to uni when I was 24. So I had to give up my full-time job and go into this whole new field of science based on open access course home learning. So many challenges. You know, I didn't have a science background. I really struggled in my first year of uni, thinking, oh my God, how am I gonna, what have I done? I've given up my whole career for this. But I pushed through. So even some of the barriers, this might sound really silly, but I never had a computer growing up. So I remember when all the other students at 18 were creating graphs, scientific graphs, like just bar charts and stuff. I used to sit in the computer center basically with my head and my hands like this. So even the simplest challenges that we think of now as being something that's just like a language, IT, just even some of those, that takes up a lot of your mental space. But like some of the other speakers, I was lucky to have some good mentors at university. But there's tons more challenges. So
yeah, no, it's really important to say that some of the challenges that you might face from a certain background may not be amongst your peers, or you feel they're not there. But this is why events such as this are fantastic, because I'm sure there's many other people out there who are sharing some of these challenges, and it'll be great in this later part of this event to share some of those and some of the advice that we might have for overcoming those. So, but thank you for sharing, Tara. That's
thank
fantastic.
you for having me. Thank you.
And our final speaker, last but not least, we've got Catherine Burton, who is the ecology lead at Sistra. So I'm going to introduce Catherine, and could you give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, please?
Yep, sure. So, yeah, I'm Catherine Burton. I'm an ecology lead for an engineering and consultancy company. And basically, I head up a team of ecologists, and we work on things like protected species surveys, habitat surveys. The main things that ecological consultants work on, I'm not sure how many people on this call will be that familiar with it or looking to get into that sector, but yeah, we work on habitat designs and biodiversity net gain, which is a big buzzword at the moment. So I grew up in Lincolnshire in the middle of nowhere. So my parents, both Londoners, moved there to afford a house. And so basically, why did I want to get into ecology? Well, let me just, yeah, so my dad was a van driver and removals guy, and my mum just looked after me and my brother and sister, which was great. Why did I want to get into ecology? Because basically I think I was born with eco-anxiety. So that was always on my mind, and as a teenager I couldn't think of working in anything else. I went to selected grammar, so you had to do an 11 plus. And then I think I found that a lot of the children around me were, their parents had all gone to university already, and everybody kind of knew what they wanted to do. So that just became apparent to me that I wasn't sure what this world was that I was about to embark on. But yeah, so I went to university and did a degree in zoology, and after that I did a PhD and worked on social insects and did a postdoctorate in them as well. Then went on to work for the Wildlife Trusts, and then went on to ecological consultancy. So I've kind of worked across a lot of sectors, so hopefully can give some advice for that.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Again, there are some themes coming out. We've only had sort of, 4 speakers, but there are some of these themes coming out about some of the journeys and the barriers that we've been facing going through this. But my quick question to you is, you have worked across a few of these sectors, but specifically that final one, the consultancy that you've gone into. Could you tell me a bit about what drove you towards that side of things? Because that is something a bit different to what we have heard about.
Yeah, so I mean, like I say, I started out in research and did a PhD in social insects, and then a postdoctorate. And then towards the end of my postdoc came a big recession, and a lot of universities were basically laying off staff, and I was just looking around and figuring out what I wanted to do, because obviously academia, a lot of it is short-term contracts. So I thought I need a bit more stability and something a bit more permanent. So ecological consultancy kind of attracted me in that aspect. And as I looked into it a bit more, you could basically get paid for doing biological recording, which was, you know, my hobby anyway. So but that was the main driver. It's just a little bit, it's a more stable career. That's what I thought at the time.
Perfect. Yeah, you're having to respond to that sort of landscape change around you. So
Yeah.
it's good to be flexible and respond to that. But you've got the skills, it sounds like, to make those changes based on each of those previous positions that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. So that is our 4 speakers. So that's our introduction, and I can tell you we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule, so thank you so much. The next bit is, this is our first really open section, which will be a bit more about what those sectors involve that our speakers are part of. So what is a day-to-day like? What is required of those sectors? And so everybody in the audience, based on what you've heard about so far, and thank you for the questions you've been posting in there already. I know that Kira and Josh will have been collecting those to bring up perhaps in the later sections, and they'll alert me if they want me to ask one of those now. But could you pop in the chat box any questions that you have about the insights into those sectors that you'd like to hear more about? What are they like? And so whilst you're thinking of those, I'm going to ask the first one to get the ball rolling. So I'm going to say Emily, because we had you first. Could you tell us a bit about your current sector? And so what is a typical day that for you in that sort of soil association? And feel free to mention what it's like in some of those bridging jobs, your entry points into that as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Well, I think things have changed a lot since I started in this sector, because I started over 20 years ago. There weren't quite as many rules for how to qualify as an auditor. So I qualified back in 2007 as a forestry auditor. And I was able to do that without having any background experience in working in forestry, other than work like the research project and shadowing other auditors, sort of on the job type training. But currently there are, well, over recent years, the sort of rules have developed a bit more, and so to go into forestry auditing, you would need to have not only a qualification relating to either ecology, forestry, anthropology even, and then you'd also need to have some experience as well in working in a related sector, so forestry, ecology, etc. So there are sort of certain rules about that. Chris, am I on the right track here, or was there?
Yeah, and I'd love, in a short way, for those who might not know what the auditing is, what would you say the purpose of auditing is? What does it do?
So the whole purpose of it is to drive forward responsible forest management. So it's a market-driven approach to improving forest management and dealing with some of the problems that we have globally with deforestation and problems with Indigenous people's rights not being respected, and ecology not being properly accommodated in forest management or commercial forest management. So when we go and do an audit, we are evaluating a globally approved standard. It's the Forest Stewardship Standard, Forest Stewardship Council, sorry, FSC, which looks at things like management planning, monitoring, environmental impact assessment, Indigenous people's rights, just to cover some of the principles. But in the end, if the forest is shown to meet those standards, then they can sell their wood or wood-based or non-timber products even with an FSC logo So when somebody goes to the shop to buy some paper or furniture or anything else, then they can look for that logo and know that it came from a well-managed forest.
It sounds
So
like
that's
it
it in a
really is.
nutshell.
Yeah, no, it's really good, because that was a question for myself, to be honest, to find out a bit more about it. So it really is sort of at the heart of sustainability and consumer choice, and really goes across sort of that science side of things, but to society. You mentioned about indigenous uses and things like this, so it is quite interdisciplinary.
It is very, very interdisciplinary. That's right. Yeah, and there's many other jobs around, you know, administering the system, of course, as well as the actual auditor's role, you know, at the forest level.
This is really interesting. So related to that, we have had one related question for Catherine, and so coming both from those sort of applied in the field sort of applications of things. So Catherine, how did you get into ecological consultancy? So specifically, someone's asked, is a PhD required for it? So if you could tell us in a nutshell what ecological consultancy is, and then perhaps how you made your way there.
Yeah, sure. So ecological consultancy, I mean, if you look at it in traditional terms, because the landscape of the job has changed somewhat, even in the last couple of years in the UK at least. But we are there to make sure, say, developers are keeping in line with all UK environmental legislation. So if you like, we're the ground troops. If anybody wants to do a development, you send in the ecologists, and we look at what protected species are there. We look at what habitats are there, and then we put forward our recommendations in terms of what can you do to avoid, what can you do to mitigate, and to compensate. And when I say the landscape has changed somewhat because we've got biodiversity net gain coming in, sometimes it's not even about doing those assessments ahead of a development. Sometimes it's people wanting to find out what the potential for their land is in terms of habitat enhancements and you know, just kind of habitat designs. How can you really make the most for wildlife on those sites? So in very broad terms, we do ecological surveys and kind of reporting and for habitat and species licensing that you might need behind that. You do not need a PhD, no, not at all. I would say the most common path into it is to get a degree, and a lot of people have a master's in biological recording or conservation. But there are avenues potentially in apprenticeship, but I say degree and master's is the most common.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. So it's good to have a bit of an insight into what that career involves, and the fact that it sounds like you don't need a PhD to get into that. There are very varied paths into it. And now there have been some questions streaming in, and what I'd say is, if our panelists see a question that's asked openly in the chat that could be answered by you, please click the reply function on there and type your response. So Catherine, there's a couple there about consultancy, but Emily, you may have some insights in there based on surveying and things like that. So let the chat light up with your replies. That would be great. I just wanted to make sure that we can get to all of our speakers with some of those introductory questions. So Sridhar, if you could, we mentioned about the PhDs and what is required for what isn't required for some career paths. But what about your academic route? So how would you describe your current day-to-day job and what it involves, and the path perhaps that you took briefly in there? Because I know we'll elaborate that later. So what is your day-to-day job?
Well, yeah, I think as most of us, the audience may know, I mean, this is like a very curiosity-driven thing, right? Like you need to be I don't know, excited about things what you see. I mean, that at least like how I say it. Like I want to understand like a big patterns, and I want to see through things, you know. I want to see like why things are working or no kind of a thing. So it's quite interdisciplinary as well. Like I don't know, when people do biology, no one tells you it's gonna be like 70% stats. so I don't know, you need to like learn new things, and and it's just not like doing research or I don't know, data analysis or writing. Like you need to attend workshops or conferences and group meetings and collaborate so much and talk to so many people, you know, and there's like constant exchanges happening. So I find it quite exciting, quite motivating how it works. It's really stimulating most of the times. But also I don't know, there is also sometimes, I don't know, the imposter syndrome is quite there sometimes when you can do it or you can't do it. So it's I don't know, overall it's a quite exciting process. And I believe I can see the shift like when I start my PhD, all the skills I kind of need to learn, you know, because for example, say coding, I didn't know much about it, but I had to start from the first year onwards, and then it kind of grew up, and then I'm quite comfortable with it now. So I believe like, yeah, that's one thing also I noticed. No one told us like all of these things are required, but these are like really soft skills which I believe are important to build up, which kind of give you quite a jump, I think, in a later stages of PhD, or when you actually want to go into the postdoc thing. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question properly, but yeah, I mean, I would be happy to answer any specifics.
Yeah, well, it's good that you mentioned, you know, nobody told you that it'd be 70% stats. This is speaking to someone who left academia because of the stats. So yeah, but it's important to Zara, because you're also in that academic sphere as well as Sridhar. So I'll have both of you here for this bit. You have gone down the senior lecturer route, which will have those teaching responsibilities. So could you give us a bit of an overview of how your job is similar to Sridhar's in that part, but also how you've added some additional responsibilities in your role that people might not be aware of as part of that senior lecturer kind of position?
Yeah, so in the UK, we have, so the way you work your way up to professor is you normally you get your PhD, you do a postdoctoral research position, potentially you can do a fellowship, and then you'll hopefully get onto an academic contract, which so you're a faculty member. So you start off as lecturer, then you go senior lecturer, then associate professor, and then professor. So that's the kind of line if you stay in academia and you want to work your way or progress within it. When you start off as a lecturer or faculty member and you're working your way up, your next load of responsibility is you're going from working on managing your own research project to then being responsible or being the supervisor of multiple research projects. So you'll end up having like your own group of PhD students and hopefully postdocs via the funding. And alongside that responsibility, you will then have to teach undergraduate students, master students. You will supervise the dissertations of undergraduates and master students. You then also have administrative responsibilities that go along with that as well. So it's a very, very varied role. So you almost become more of like a research project manager alongside then your teaching and other administrative responsibilities. So
it's a really good insight, because just like Sridhar, you said you weren't aware that it was, you know, increasingly stats. I think many that can go down the academic route may not be aware of how much admin or support or management might come out of some of those paths as well. And I'm sure Emily and Catherine, you might have a similar thing as you progressed, where your responsibilities changed and you had to be involved in different tasks. So I suppose now of one of the open questions that I might ask is, considering this and how your roles have changed as you've progressed, has there been a particular something that you didn't like as part of your career path in a particular job that would be really useful for people to be aware of, so they can either mold their abilities to compensate for it or to avoid it or anything like this? So I might pass it back to Catherine. If there was something that you didn't like during your career path that is important for people to know that may be following a similar path.
Okay. That's an interesting one. So I would say when looking at so if you're looking at getting into ecological consultancy, to just do a lot of research and make sure that you're working for a company that's got the same kind of ethos as yourself. So I've had maybe a misstart in one company because it didn't quite align with what I thought was right in terms of, you know, well, actually, what I would say is make sure that whoever you want to work for is probably a member of CIEM, which is a Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, just to make sure that, like, they're doing everything like totally above board. And yeah, because sometimes you can be put in an awkward situation. Clients can push back on various things that they potentially don't want to do, and you want to make sure that whoever you're working for has got your backing with that. I've only had one occasion where that's happened, but it's important to make sure that you're comfortable with the company that you're working for.
It's a really good point about researching who you're working for to have that right fit culturally. It's very similar for academics, your supervisor or your research group. I imagine that you want to find that fit. So I don't know if any of our other panelists had something to add to that, sort of researching where you're going to work as a bit of advice and the benefits of that. So perhaps Emily or anyone else to join in.
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer that, having been in the same organization for such a long time. Yeah, I guess you kind of know when it's the right place for you, would be my thoughts on it, really. But I suppose, you know, try to just get a feel for an organization, you know, look at their website, sign up to any newsletters that they might have. Yeah, try to sort of attend any conferences or anything that they might be involved in. Yeah.
I think it's a good point, though, researching that fit. And if it feels right, it feels right. If there aren't the red flags, then perhaps you're in a good home. So that is nice. But Zara, from that academic side of things, culture in academia is obviously a big factor, and whether it's supportive. So have you found any challenges in the day-to-day culture of academia? And perhaps Shrita, you could join in after Zara if you have anything to add.
Yeah, sorry, I've been answering the message. There's some generic questions here that I think would be good to answer, but I'll say that later. Sorry, I like get involved with my OCD. I'm like, answer. So with academia, there's definitely issues around culture, and I think we all see it a lot. Particularly about women in science, that is a big thing. You know, the system is set up for a specific type of person to do very well in academia. But because I always see the negative about academia, I'm not going to dwell on it too much. The main thing is that it is changing. It might be changing slowly, but with this new generation of faculty members, like now, we have so much, there's a better sex or gender ratio happening. We've got research culture, or like committees now in some universities. We've got, you know, people trying to work to improve things, safety and equality in fieldwork and ecology. You know, I'm one of them with other people. We've got people tackling neurodiversity and ecology. So yes, there's many barriers, but look for institutions that have got active members of staff that are vocal and organizing these committees, so you can see improvements happening in your institution. That's how I've always chosen where to work.
Thank you very much. No, that is absolutely brilliant. And what I really like about that is there are brilliant places where they are supporting. So if any of our panelists or our audience have found things that they think are very good in promoting that inclusivity in any form, please pop a link in the chat. You know, let's share amongst each other, and let's make sure we can all learn from each other about what good things to look out for. So no, thank you very much. And Shrita, just as we wrap up this section before we move on to the next one, was there anything you wanted to add on to
that? I mean, especially being a postdoc, I believe, and perhaps many postdocs would kind of resonate with what I want to say. I mean, pay is definitely a big issue, and I think many of you are actually addressing it, right? On top of that, also stability, right? Just like 2 years of postdocs. And then what I tend to say people like how postdoc is going. I was like, I'm handing my past, present, and future all at the same time. You're wrapping up your past papers, you're working on a current projects, and you're working your future grants to kind of, you know, maintain the stability throughout. So yeah, it's challenging, it's also rewarding, but I believe like it's a tough to navigate to this sometimes, because and also, I don't know, being international, and the one issue I have sometimes, like staying away from home for a very long time, right? I don't know, maybe this is a UK specific, I don't know, but then the international people have like huge problems, and also traveling is so expensive to fly most of the time. So this seem like trivial problems, I don't know, but you know, they end up having like a big kind of I don't know, effective in some sense. So yeah, I don't know, these are some of the additional points I believe I would like to mention.
No, it's a really good point. I know we do have quite an international audience, so it'd be fantastic to hear about those kind of insights as well, because yeah, being away for a very long time is a very difficult thing. And even in the UK, moving far away from your family can be a very difficult thing. So it is important to raise these things. So thank you very much. And now we're just going to move on to our next section. So again, this is that open thing. And what's been brilliant is I see a lot of people have been asking questions, they're getting answered in the chat. So thank you very much to our panelists for multitasking. And Josh and Kira, ping me one if you see an essential one that you'd like me to ask. But this section is more about those routes into these roles. So this is about those sector qualifications and the pipeline into getting into your route. And by pipeline, we mean that sort of that progression, those stepping stones, or how you might follow different routes into those paths. So what I'd like to ask first is, what qualifications are typically required for your sector? And what does a typical career path look like? Or if there isn't a typical one, tell us about the varied. So I might go straight back to the academic side. I'll switch it up. So actually, I'm going to go straight for Zara. And I know I can see you typing there, so I've absolutely got you there, I'm afraid. But what are the career paths? You mentioned a few of them, that career path into academia, but how varied can that path be? What are the different routes that you might be able to take into that path, and what are the requirements for it?
Yeah, so I had a bit of a detour. I didn't last very long because I came back, but I had a detour after my first postdoc because we were in a position where we couldn't move to actually go and do another, for me to go and do another postdoctoral position. So a lot of stuff you might see, not negative stuff you might see, is that once you've left academia, there's no way you can get back into it. It's a big lie. So yeah, you do need to maintain your kind of profile and your research profile, and I'll mention that in a sec, but you can absolutely leave and come back. So I went and worked for the government, and I worked as a statistician for the government, Scottish government, and then I got back into academia. And I would say that actually one of the reasons why I think I got the job was because I'd had external experience working for government on a specific role that I was doing at the time, which just edged me above somebody else that might not have that experience. So you never know what people are looking for, basically. Yeah, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah, so basically, you know, even you can go do ecological consultancy and come back. I would just say that the one thing is, because research is, you know, it's very competitive and it can be very demanding. The only thing I would say is, while I was working for government, I was trying to maintain writing papers, research papers. So I kept my research profile. So, and that was hard because you're working full time and then you're going home in the evening to try and write papers. So it's not ideal, but because I knew I wanted to go back, I had to keep my research profile open. That's the only thing I would say.
No, it's really interesting. I like the fact that you said you went out and you came in, because one of the very common things of people asking about how to progress an academic route is, if I leave, I won't get back. And that appears not to be the case.
I think
it appears that you can bring benefits. Yeah, Zara, go on.
Sorry, no, I just think that academia is changing a little bit, slowly, but I do believe that skills outside of that traditional path of going to school, going to do your undergrad, and then working your way straight through are actually, in some institutions, will value that because it gives you experience. It also allows, for me, I can see the way some of my colleagues interact with students very differently from other colleagues who've had different routes in. So there is space, there is hopefully, and there is space open at the moment for people from different backgrounds, because we have students now from so many different backgrounds. You can't just have the same person teaching and dealing with students. And anyway,
I love that people want diverse backgrounds in
Yeah.
these areas, because from diversity comes that innovation and becomes those new thoughts and new ideas of collaboration. So yeah, that is a really nice point to bring up. And I've just been pinged a couple of questions, which I think is a nice segue from that kind of diversity of entry routes in. And it centers around volunteering. It's a big question a lot of people are asking. And mainly, so how do you get skills without volunteering? Because of course that means you're unpaid, which can be a big barrier for yourself if you are holding down any kind of job or just working really hard at your degree trying to get through. And so how can you get skills if you're not volunteering? So Emily, I might pass to you, and it may be from yourself and it might be others that you've seen around you getting into your organizational sector as well.
Yeah, I think I think people that have come straight out of university have sometimes come into our admin team and started off there because of that's sort of just given them an entry point really into the team, and then they've just worked their way up into other responsibilities, other roles. So that's definitely something I've seen happening quite a lot in recent years. And then sometimes people would get the sort of knowledge of certification that they wanted, and then they might actually leave and do a job working for a woodland trust or wildlife trust or another organisation, and then come back to us again. Or Zoological Society of London, somebody left to go there and then came back again. And there's lots of interesting roles. So yeah, we've definitely seen a bit of toing and froing.
So it sounds like the idea is you can go in through different routes. It doesn't have to be the dream job first. It can be an adjacent role.
Absolutely. Yeah, and some have worked their way up through academia as well. Some have even got, several master's degrees, thinking international students. We've got a really international team. So we've got people coming from a lot of different countries around Europe, particularly, and maybe they couldn't quite get the job that they wanted and they've been working in another sector. And then they've found us, and they've actually really taken off with their career. So yeah,
that's perfect. Thank you. And so, Catherine, I might ask you a similar thing, because notoriously ecological consultancy can involve a lot of groundwork to get your skills up, and that can sometimes involve unpaid work. So what would your advice be to aspiring ecological consultants for trying to find experience that isn't unpaid volunteering, or it might be free to do development on the side?
So it is a frustration, certainly, that that you might find that you have to do volunteering, but there are other ways potentially. So in ecological consultancy, habitat assessment is becoming way more important, and you can almost self-teach some of that to an extent. So if you showed your enthusiasm for that, and say maybe you enrolled on something like Identiplant that BSBI does. I know you have to pay for that one, but there are similar things that you can find online that are free, and just you can kind of teach yourself on how to do a lot of botanical assessment. And that might apply actually in terms of if you wanted to potentially get into ornithology or something like that. Something that I also recommend, because I was a biological records officer for the Wildlife Trust for some time, is there is a huge network of biological recorders out there and societies. So they do a lot of field events. So if you have a quick Google, see what's going on in your area, you might have a really active botanical society or really active moth trappers, something like that. they often car share if that's a problem for you, or they organize lots of events, so there is really no substitute for going out with the experts. So I would say that's another good way of doing it.
I really love that point, using your community they're so keen to share knowledge in so many situations. And it's that classic thing, you could read a blog for an hour or speak to an expert for 5 minutes and you'll probably learn just as much. So that is a really, really useful tip. And a very quick question before I go on to another one for Catherine again. Someone's asked specifically, is the online training, such as with Saeem, helpful for your CV when you're looking at those kind of jobs? So when you are hiring these people entering into a consultancy, do you actually look at that online training from Saeem or other providers?
Yeah, we absolutely do, because to an extent it shows what your enthusiasm is for the subject. And Saeem do very good training courses, so they tick all the boxes. But I would say don't limit yourself to Saeem, because there are an awful lot of training providers out there, and a lot of it is free. So I would encourage you not to get too worked up if you can't afford Saeem events, because like I say, that it's about showing your enthusiasm. And if you can literally sit down with a botanical key and self-teach, that conveys a lot for your enthusiasm to get into that area. So that will be considered too.
That's perfect. No, thank you so much. So the categorical is yes, you do pay attention to it. It shows that enthusiasm, it shows that knowledge and skill base, but there are other providers from those major providers. If anybody has used a provider of training, if Catherine, you have some, for Emily, you have some, or everybody else, please pop them in the chat, because I'm sure there's many people who will really be grateful for some signposting towards some good training providers. I've got a question that's been posted for Sridhar, actually. So Sridhar, do you think that it was beneficial to work? So it's very similar to this sort of volunteering question, how can we gain experience? But do you think it was beneficial to work as a research assistant before your PhD? Were there any pros or cons of going straight into your PhD after a master's or undergrad?
I don't think there is a yes and no answer question to that thing, to be honest. For me, working as a research assistant was useful, and I think I was only half paid and half was not paid. But anyways, so it was helpful because I think my undergrad and masters weren't great. I didn't get many skills, and I really wanted to do something and build up my CV a bit so that I'm a bit competitive for the international PhD applications. So for me, it was great. But some people who end up going to the really good undergrad and master, so they might actually get all the kind of, I don't know, qualifications they get during that time. And in that, I know many people like who go to the good institutes and they don't need to do any extra research assistant work as such, and they can jump straight to the PhD. So I believe it's very context dependent, and I don't think there is yes and no answer to that. And also during my undergrad and masters, I could not afford to go do any we're talking quite a bit about volunteering here. So I could not go out of my state and do anything extra because you need to live there and it's not paid. So it didn't really work out well for me. So I had to kind of compensate that after my master's to work for a bit extra and try to, build up on the experience a bit. So yeah, so I think you need to weigh in if it's helpful, if it's not helpful, and whether if you actually paid for it or not paid for it. So yeah, sorry, no clear-cut answer there.
No, I think that's good to say. It's never clear cut. It's a good way of weighing it up, whether it works for you and it gets you a bit further to where you want to be. So did you look at particular skills or experience that it was going to bring you as being that research assistant that would help you move forward?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I knew what I wanted to do for my PhD, and then I knew that I didn't have the skills. For example, like how do you do big experiments? I didn't have many stat skills, so I really wanted to learn a bit of coding and do a bit of stats and improve my English a bit, even and read a bit and listen to lectures and go. I was in a really nice institute, so I could go and attend lectures given by those really good profs, which I was not given during the masters, right? So I felt like I was learning quite a lot. I felt like I didn't learn in the 4 years of my undergrad and masters, but I was able to learn it in 6-8 months. So yeah, I think it was really beneficial for me. And then I was looking for those specific things to tick off so that I would be actually, you know, not lagging behind from a PhD, or even be competitive to actually apply abroad and actually, yeah. So absolutely.
I think that's really good. So it is developing those skills. And the good thing is I often get a question, which is, should I do this position? That's a research assistant, even if it's not in the area that I want to go into next. And sometimes it can be, okay, as we've heard from Emily and Catherine, you know, being adjacent is fine. It's about
Absolutely.
the skills that you'll get. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, statistics, right? It doesn't matter if you're working on this project or that project. It's like a very generalized methods we apply, right? So if it's gonna strengthen your base, and if you're gonna learn something out of it, and it's kind of generalizable, and if you can apply it, or it's like a transferable skill, if I may call it, then why not, right? Like just do it. Don't think about what specifics you're doing. So yeah, I would just learn the skills and then like apply to as many things as I can. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And Zara, I don't know if you've got any things to add about the value of how you might find those experience building opportunities within university alongside your degree that might help you. So I don't know from your perspective as a lecturer, what you might give advice for people hoping to gain experience alongside their degree.
So there's when I worked in Newcastle, that saying "shy burns getting out." Sorry, I probably haven't done it justice, but honestly, go and ask your lecturers if they have opportunities. I just go and knock on their doors. Sometimes Josh also posted in there that sometimes there are internships available that are funded through the UK government schemes. Sometimes they're PhD researchers that have got some money in their budget and they need a field assistant. You just never know what's available. If you have a class with a lecturer and you think, wow, I really like that subject, go and speak to them. Also, if you're at university in the UK, you should have a personal tutor assigned to you. Speak to them about opportunities and who they would also recommend for you to go and speak to. I love it when students come and say, do you have, I might not have it. And often the times I used to do stuff for free and I used to work, and it's not great. But I know sometimes I won't give a student an opportunity unless I can pay them. And luckily there are those things available now. So just go knock on people's doors, honestly. You just never know what you're going to get. And if you don't ask, you don't get.
I absolutely love that advice, and I benefited from that tactic in my undergrad as well. A big shout out to my old professor, Professor Owen Lewis, who gave me my first paid voluntary position, looking at the red list index for butterflies, to actually help contribute towards the red list index. And that was as an 18, 19-year-old. So, you know, if you ask, you might get something amazing. So yeah, brilliant advice there. Ask and you might get something. We've had a really nice question, actually more for the ecological society side, the ecological consultancy side of things. So Catherine, one of the questions that has been asked here, and Emily, this might relate to you as well, but what is the best way to build practical survey experience while studying?
So while studying, I would say if you can somehow get so there's a lot of seasonal ecologist roles out there, and there are students that take part in those seasonal ecology roles, and they're basically paid, and that will get you your kind of on-site experience. And I know there's been quite a few questions in the chat about where you would go to find those. And I would recommend going to some of the larger consultancies because they work on big projects, they need big teams, and so they look for those seasonal ecologists. So it's worth looking at, say, you know, Mott MacDonald and Jacobs. They're all big engineering consultancies. They all take on seasonal ecology roles, and they can fit in with studies often. Yeah, that's probably the best way of doing it.
I'm muted. There you go. But Emily, I don't know if you've got anything to add there, seeing as you've had some experience in that kind of the practical surveying side of things as well.
I think my experience is probably a little bit more out of date than what Catherine's just offered there. But yeah, so the involvement was, for me, was 20 odd years ago of doing the research surveys in Vietnam, which was, again, yeah, as I mentioned, you know, going for a volunteer research assistant position and fundraising for that. Other than that, probably it was, for me, it was really all the practical surveying on my actual degree course, really. And that was, for me, what really drew me to the environmental science ecology course, was all of the field work and surveying that we were doing and that I really enjoyed. Yeah, so that's all I can say, I think.
Yeah, but utilizing and leveraging what you do in your degree is sometimes an underused aspect of what we put in our CVs and in our applications. You've done it, you have the skill, you have the knowledge of how it's done, so you can use that in your application. So no, thank you, Catherine and Emily, that's perfect. I just say it's amazing how many questions are going on in the chat, and amazing how our speakers are multitasking, doing both. So thank you very much for so much participation in there. If you've had a question that's been in relation to a barrier, I have noted it, and we are saving it for this final section that we have now. So this is the final open section that we've got here. And it's just to say that this is all about those barriers and the culture within the sectors that we're in at the moment. So I know that Josh is going to post something in the chat in a minute. There we are on cue. So if you've got any questions, this Padlet, it's got a link in the chat that may go. The link isn't live at the moment, so you might have to post the URL directly into the chat so that can be live for it. But if you want to ask those questions and it doesn't come up, just post them to Kira or to Josh in a private message as well, so we can find them. But what I'd like to say is, if you'd like to ask those questions, please put them on the Padlet. There's the link. Thank you, BES, who have put that in there. So if you click on that link in the Padlet, you'll see a screen come up on your browser, and there will be able for you to post your questions on there if you'd like them to be anonymously posted, unless you have a Padlet account, in which case sign out and go back in. And otherwise, just post them to Josh or Kira and they'll come through, or open if you'd like to ask them openly. But I'd like to go into the Padlet. You can share your own thoughts there and your own reflections and your own experiences about some of the themes that the panel have discussed. So if you wanted to post some of your reflections on the barriers and the culture that you're expecting or experiencing as first generation or low income or other factors as well, please put them in there. And Josh or Kira, if I've introduced that wrong, please let me know in the chat and I'll do that as well. But onto the questions. So I'm going to ask a really open and blunt first question, which is, what are the barriers to first gen and working class students in your sector? But if you could phrase it around the positives of how we might overcome them. So we're here to share advice. I'm sure we could all share a lot of barriers and shared experiences of the difficulties we've had. But to make sure we can action some of that advice for our audience, please could you say how you overcome them, or how you would suggest others might overcome them? So I might do a lucky dip and I'm going to go Zara, because you're in the middle of my screen. So Zara, what are the barriers for first gen and working class students that might go into that academic sector?
So many. Navigating the system when you've got no one to speak to about it and no one else has ever done it in your friendship group or your family. So unfortunately, it becomes very, very time consuming and very overwhelming. So yeah, I think it's, luckily there are like, even just, sorry, I'm just thinking about how I even got into uni. So a lot of extra reading, and I would always contact, I think they gave you a point of contact for the university, and I ended up asking them information about all things, which I'm sure irritated them so much. That's why I'm always for asking anything you can all the time. And I feel anxious and not good enough all the time. But I have to keep asking questions. And there are a lot of people out there that will help you. But you might just have to put up with the fact that some will knock you back. but you just got to keep finding the next person to help answer that question. That would be my advice. And then, yeah, the money, I see the money thing coming up a lot, but I'm sure that someone else will probably pick that up as well. But money is big. I've still got a lot of debt that I'm paying off money-wise. It's not funny, but you know, nervous laugh money.
I'm with you. I nervous laugh as well. No, it is good just that tip of asking. You know, if we do lack those role models, those sources of knowledge in our immediate community, in our immediate family group, or whatever it may be, we do have to work sometimes a bit harder to find those role models, but they can be life-changing when you can find someone that can just give you that tiny bit of information or advice or support. It really can help you overcome it. So try listing down what you don't know, or what you're worried about, or what you're concerned about, and have a mind map and think who might be able to answer that question, what kind of person, and reaching out to people, because it can be transformative. So no, Zara, thank you very much for reiterating that. I wanted to throw Sridhar, in terms of the way that you've gone down the academic route as well, and of course you were mentioning earlier your international perspective as well. So could I ask you whether there have been any particular barriers or challenges that you've encountered, and how you've been able, or would suggest other people might tackle those challenges?
Yeah, I think I can 90% kind of ascertain this to having good mentors. I think Zara was saying it is like, you know, just write to as many people as possible, right? I mean, at some point I used to like, you know, it doesn't matter now. I'm just gonna drop emails to people and then see what's gonna work out, not gonna work out. So doing my master's, like there was this is like from the personal experience, like how it changed my life. So we had to like get out from a master's. We had like 4 months to do a dissertation. And I was thinking like, where should I go? And like there's like a lot of imposter, right? So I was afraid to like write to big people, but then I was just like, I'm just gonna write. I have seen this is happening in the field, and I want to know like why this happens. Like you know, could I get like 4-month internship or to do my dissertation? And he said, yes, I can't pay you, but you can come and work in my lab. I was like, fine. I was like, I'll try and like, you know, arrange money somehow and like just live. And I think going there and getting that experience, it literally changed my life. And based on that experience, I was then able to apply abroad for my PhD and then come out and do it. So I think if you have good mentors, I believe like it really makes your life way more easier. They can help you navigate through the system, show you who to approach, who not to approach. And this might sound very trivial, but what I also found is, for example, say many of the institutions, at least back in India, they don't have institution IDs. And let's say if I write something from my Gmail or Outlook, it ends up in like the spam of most of the institutions abroad, right? And then I used to go and ask the super advisors of mine. I was like, can you please write an email introducing me to these people? And then they used to do it. And it used to be like much more easy, I believe, to approach people and to contact them. So I don't know, perhaps like, I don't know, that's like the best suggestion based on personal experience I can give you. I just write to people. There are some really nice people out there who might actually help. Yeah.
No, it's really, really nice to say. I'm glad that this is some key advice that goes through. And I know that networking can be quite a scary thing, that cold calling, cold approaching, those things. But many people are really, you know, flattered to have someone approach them for advice if you show interest in their area. So try a bit of flattery, and something that always works. But the other thing is, ask your careers service, ask your trusted lecturer or tutor to introduce you to people or suggest people, and having that mutual connection can be a really nice way to break the seal for that. So I might flip it over, because we've had that's great advice from the academic side. And how about this practical side beyond academia? And so, Emily, I know you've mentioned, you know, it may have been 20 years ago that you entered, but what advice do you give people who are seeking to enter the kind of sector that you're in? How do you suggest that people can find mentors or role models or information about the kind of careers that you're involved in?
Okay. Finding mentors. Yeah, I guess you know, you have to look at whatever's available to you, really. I mean, one excellent source for networking is LinkedIn, I find. So, you know, if you're on LinkedIn and start to sort of join groups that you're interested in, you know, you'll start to be connected with other people that are interested in things that you're also interested in. You know, and you can start to sort of follow people, you know, in organizations that you're interested in, and actually you're the first to find out when jobs are advertised. So I think that's probably, you know, in the current times for my sector, I'd say that's probably the best advice that I could give on that.
And so
It
it's
doesn't
really
cost
good.
anything, so.
Yeah, that is a good point. All these contacts, people, it doesn't cost anything to reach out. And now with Zoom and Teams and whatever it might be, it's even easier to meet than it was. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a good point actually to raise that many groups that you can join, like Emily says, that are sources of these mentors, you know, just as examples, learned societies, charities, student societies. These will often have people who might be going through similar routes to you, or they bring back alumni and speakers you can talk to. The BES obviously has all of its special interest groups that you can go to in applied and academic settings. So look for the British Ecological Society special interest groups. You also have all the other communities like the SEED Network that you're part of today, where you'll meet lots of people you can reach out to and be part of community. But there's the READ Network, which is set up for equality of minority ethnicities. You've got the EDGE Network, which is for minority genders. And you've got the Older Network, which is part of the LGBTQ+ communities, and all of these that you can join, and you can meet people and encounter networks and stories for that as well. So please do, and I'm sure the BES, Josh, Kira can bombard the chat with the links to those different groups as well, so you can have a look at those if you weren't aware. We've had a really interesting question, and it was directed to Sridhar actually, which was the intersectionality of different barriers for groups, though. If you're willing to answer, how your status in first gen and working class may have intersected with other identifiers you may associate with, such as ethnicity or your international student status, and how they may have compounded or interact with each other for your career progression so far.
Yeah, the ethnicities thing, I'm not really sure, because I don't have a very clear-cut case as such which I can pinpoint and they say this was because of my ethnicity that happened. And that might be because, I don't know, maybe I always worked with like a really good mentors and advisors I had. Perhaps like they shielded me from all of these issues that were coming in. But we do know that it's prejudiced, right? Like, for example, I think there was a recent study which kind of showed that people who don't have non-English names get higher rates of rejections in the papers, basically, when they send it compared to English name. So definitely there is something going on, but then I don't have like a very clear-cut case study as such to say this was because of my ethnicity and that affected me this way. But for being a first gen, definitely I think I was raised by a single mother, basically. And it was tough, right? I mean, you don't think about these things. And for example, say in wildlife, and I think even Kira mentioned it in her op-ed when she wrote it, that if you want to say buy equipment like say binoculars or say the cameras, are so expensive, right? I mean, I couldn't afford like a camera until like third year of my PhD, to be honest. And it's not easy. And then I remember I could not even afford say insect net. And then me and my brother used to make insect nets out of this broken badminton rackets, right? I mean, I don't want to glorify it, but you don't realize it. But these things end up having, I feel at least, that they affect your confidence in some sense. And then you feel like, you know, I don't belong there, and then you're always like, I know there is something in the back of your head that you're always concerned about. So definitely, I think, and I also see it like works in a very feedback loop. For example, say you don't have money, you can't go to a good school, you can't go to good colleges, so you don't get all the exposure, right? And you don't get exposure because of that, and you can't go ahead, and you're kind of, you know, caught up in this kind of link, and you got to break it out somehow, and perhaps good people, or you're just lucky to break it out of it. I don't know how it works. So I see it as a very complex issue, but I believe meeting right people, meeting right mentors might actually help you to get out of that loop and try to break it. Yeah, and perhaps then you will act as a center who will help others to do it. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Oh, thank you. And for the private anonymous question that was submitted that I just asked there, if you were to ask something more specific, then please feel free to put it in the private chat and we can follow up later for that. So one of the questions I wanted to ask as well, because we are here with the barriers, and you did mention on it there, the big elephant in the room can be finance. We've talked about role models and the how we might be able to access those role models to to help compensate for some of the barriers being first generation may have for us in our progression, but finance as well for being in that sort of lower socioeconomic income bracket. And I wonder if there was any advice that the panel might have for how we might positively overcome or help ourselves develop in our careers, or what barriers you may have faced due to those financial barriers and how you try to overcome that. So I might pass over to Catherine first, or whoever's willing to follow as well, if you're willing to share a story.
Yeah, well, I often say one of the problems we have is that this is one of the careers where you've got people willing to do it for free. So you've got an awful lot of people that will go out there and do biological recording for free and just volunteer to do it, but that can be problematic. I would say don't think that you have to go off and do, 2 years volunteering looking at rhino abroad or something like that. From an ecological consultancy point of view, what we're interested in is can you do UK habitat assessments and that kind of thing. So don't think it has to be some huge volunteering activity you've got to take part in, because honestly, if you're self-taught and you've just been going out at the weekend and doing bits with your local recording society, I'd say that's more valuable in a lot of cases. So try not to let that put you off at all.
I really like that as advice. And there's a lot of systems coming in place, like narrative CVs in academia, that do count opportunity in terms of assessing someone's CV. So the fact that perhaps if you had lower income and you had fewer opportunities and you were able to achieve a certain amount, that might be a strong indicator of your quality for a certain position. So we can actually use these barriers as narratives that are positive things, as Catherine's saying, be local, do something here. That was how you making the most of the opportunities in your local area. So you can really spin that as a strength and a positive narrative. That's your identity and your story for your career development. Sorry, a little bit of my soapbox there, but I love it. So Zara, I saw you nodding effusively there. So maybe I could pass over to you to see if there was anything you wanted to add there about overcoming those financial barriers.
I think Catherine said it all. I was just nodding in agreement that unfortunately it is an expensive career to start with, but it doesn't have to be. And I think Catherine has given some really good examples of how to try and alleviate some of that financial pressure. In ecology, even just having the right clothes to work in can be really expensive. So, and that's something that I struggled with a lot when I started out. But now good secondhand shops, hopefully that works. And some universities have also set up, again, it's asking. Some universities have even set up these secondhand field stores. So we've got that here at Stirling, where you can actually go and hire out field gear and stuff as well, because it is expensive to buy a pair of decent boots and things like that. Yeah, but yeah, Catherine's advice: if I get a CV of a student and it shows that they've been working on weekends whilst you've got to have a part-time job because you need to afford your rent, you're studying, and on the weekends you potentially have once a month you've gone out and done a habitat survey. Or I've got a student that said, oh, I've gone out and spent 3 weeks in the Caribbean. I know which one. I'm not saying that the other one's not valued, but you know what I mean. It's like that valuing that time and effort that you've put in. It doesn't matter that you've not been, like Catherine was saying, out somewhere looking at rhinos or sharks or something. It's really about your effort. And if it's a person, that doesn't take you because of that, then you probably don't want to work for that person in the first place. So it's my soapbox.
No, I think it's good. And again, you talk about the loaning and the lending of that equipment, which I think is a really nice thing about seeing that equipment can be a barrier, the cost of us just getting in the field. And again, I was the beneficiary of very kind, my tutor. Again, I'll give him a shout out, that lent me my first, field shirts and boots and things like that to go into the field. So I'm very grateful for the generosity of others that can help us overcome this. And now we are at time, and there are so many questions that I wish we had time to get through, but we are going into the final section here, which is a bit of a wrap up from Josh. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for all of the stories that they've shared here. It's been full of advice, which is so brilliant, that the fact that we can take away some of this and share some of this. So I would say for the final pitch, normally we go round to our speakers and we'd ask them verbally to say what their best advice would be. But I'd encourage each of our panelists to put their top advice in the chat, please, so everybody can see that. So you're what I wish I could have said to our audience for helping for our first gen and socioeconomic income audience that might help them on their career. And so I'd just like to thank everybody again, and I'm going to pass over to Josh, and thank you to our audience as well.
Oh, hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm Josh. I'm the other BES Seed co-chair. So I'd like to start by just thanking everyone for being here and taking part. I'd like to give a big thank you to our chair, Chris, and our speakers, Emily, Zara, Sridhar, and Catherine, for giving up their time and sharing all their experiences. I'd like to thank the other Seed Committee members, Chiara, Rachel, Janine, and Sophie, who've been working in the background on the chats and on our social media. I'd also like to thank our BES staff member, Sammy, who's been also working away behind the scenes. I really hope that you found the event really useful and interesting. It's our first event, so obviously there's going to be some bugs, there'll be some things we can improve. We may be sending out a questionnaire soon to ask for your feedback and your advice. We will leave the Padlet open till tomorrow morning, so if there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free to do so till tomorrow. We'll also be writing up an article for the BES Niche, which is the BES's members magazine. So if you're a member, then you'll be able to read that later. The panel will be on YouTube as well, so eventually, so you'll be able to go back to any sections you found particularly useful. If you'd like to join Seed, Chiara should be posting the details in the chat now. If you have any ideas for events, or you think that you would like to support us in some way, feel free to contact us. If you'd like to join the BES2, student membership is free for 1 year, so I'd encourage you to sign up for that and try and get as much out of that free year as possible. Our next event for the Seed Network will be at the BES annual meeting in Belfast, where we'll be having a social networking meeting where you'll get to meet us in person, talk to us and chat with other first gen and working class ecologists. So with that, I'd like to thank you once again, and I hope you have a lovely evening and see some of you in Belfast, hopefully.